It was the first time I'd ever taken acid. Joe and I had already given up on it, thinking we were sold a load of junk, like the last time that we bought it. But as we pulled up to our hangout, the acid began to kick in. Our hangout, an abandoned house just off Rye Road, which we aptly named the Rye House after the long-dead residents that once lived there. There were gruesome rumors about the Rye family, but we didn't know if any of it were true or if it was just folk tales told to keep the children away from the house. We enjoyed the stories, true or not. John Boy was already there and met us at the car. He went straight toward the cooler of beer, his speech slurring as he spoke, but had the most joyful smile plastered across his face. "I see butterflies," he said, his arms majestically flapping as though he were becoming one with them. It wasn't that funny, really, but we all laughed uncontrollably. Even once, I thought I was going to pass out. Our legs couldn't hold us up, and we rolled around on the ground laughing. Joe, for some reason, rolled as well, but then he began rolling towards the house. It made me laugh even more. We were tripping. Our trip to the psychedelic world had just begun, and for the next 8 to 12 hours, we would be living in another world. Would it be a world full of sunshine and rainbows? Or a world full of monsters and mayhem? We didn't know. For the rest of the evening, we would not be able to leave the world our minds would eventually create. Joe stopped rolling once he hit the stairs to the porch. We had already turned our focus back to the butterflies that moved in slow motion all around us. Their colors were brilliant and seemed to leave a trail of colored dust in their wake. "This one looks like you, Joe," I said, carefully inspecting the butterfly that appeared to dance before me. Its tiny head had taken the shape of Joe's face. I leaned in. "I think it's saying something to me," I said. "Holy shit," Joe said. "They do look like me." "This is fucked up," John Boy said. "Too many Joes." He sat down on the stoop. The look of confusion glazed over his eyes. "Oh shit," John Boy said, drawing out the last word. "I'm tripping balls." Then hit his head with his hands, trying to knock out the cobwebs. The old two-story house was built in the 1930s. The earth was still trying to reclaim the home, but that would be years away. All the windows had been broken for a long time now, and various wildlife had taken up residence inside the house over the years. Vines crawled up the sides of the house and feces littered the corners, while some of the interior doors were either missing or barely clinging to their frame. John Boy and Joe grabbed the cooler from the car in synchronized swing and somehow managed to carry it inside. Though I watched Joe and John Boy hoist the cooler inside the house, my mind was still trying to get into the head of the butterfly, trying to figure out what it was telling me. I don't remember the outcome, but eventually the butterfly was gone, and I was left there only just realizing it had left. The sun was beginning to set as I walked almost magically, it seemed, into the house. Joe had already slumped into an old nasty couch that we saved many years ago from the dump. It was horrible then, and now it's even worse, with the years sitting under the window. It was stained with God knows what, and its odor had become musty. Joe's eyes were closed as he breathed in an oversized lung full of weed while holding on to an unopened can of beer in his hand. John Boy was now outside, waving his arms around as though he were being attacked by a horde of bees. The butterflies were gone, and the dragonflies took their place. They looked massive. I followed one out onto the porch. John Boy continued to swat at them, now, however, with a fever pitch, cursing the whole time until falling defeated onto the ground. Once he hit the ground, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a gun. "The goddamn demons!" he yelled, looking at me, still swatting at the air, waving the loaded gun around, trying to take aim at one of them. Then, as he spoke those words, a look of fear swept across his face. He got up screaming, dropped the gun, and ran into the forest. I too saw the demon faces and the dragonflies, but for some reason I felt at peace with them, as though they were soothing me. I picked up the gun and put it in my waistbands. Back in the house, I turned on the lantern and sat down next to Joe, who was in his own private world. I sat there watching the shadows of light cast around the room. Every now and then I would hear John Boy still yelling and running from the demons. Just the thought of him alone caused me to chuckle. Every few minutes, almost like a time loop, Joe would have a panic attack because he forgot to breathe, and I was there to help him calm him down and show him how to breathe again. It seemed John and Joe were going on a bad trip, while I felt perfectly fine, or so I thought. While I was watching the shadows dance across the walls, I heard footsteps upstairs, like someone was running. I looked at Joe, my eyes growing wide as I realized he had heard it too. "What the fuck was that?" he said. "Someone's upstairs," I said, my mouth forming an oval, my eyes seemingly growing wider and wider. Joe closed his eyes and with another gasp, opened them again, forgetting to breathe yet again. "Let's go check it out," I said, though I really didn't want to. I hadn't heard John Boy in a while, but I knew that he couldn't be upstairs. He would have to walk past me to reach the stairs. "I'm not fucking going up there," Joe said. "I can't move. I'm stuck here. I've been trying to get up for the past hour." He seemed to be shrinking more and more into the couch. "Don't let the couch eat you," I said. Joe's eyes lit up for a second in contemplating fear, but then closed them again, sinking further into the couch. "Here," I said, and handed him the gun, setting it on his lap. "I'm going up there." While I made my way to the stairs, I grabbed the lantern and was amazed by the shadows it cast. As I neared the top of the stairs, I froze, hearing little footprints running away. I never saw anything. I wanted to run, but my legs would not allow me. Something was up there. I could feel my legs shaking. I could hear Joe grasping for air down below. The hair on my arms stood stiff, but they also tingled, and I would never understand why. It felt like I was walking into a bubble of sorts, because as I took a step forward, my peripheral vision shimmered, and I could no longer hear Joe or John Boy anymore. Down at the end of the hall, I saw a shadow of something move, in a low guttural growl that seemed to echo in my head. It was swaying. I took another step forward, squinting my eyes, trying to make out the shape. I held out the lantern, extending nearly beyond my reach. It whispered to me the words, "Closer." The shadows danced eerily on the walls as though there were several beings there in movement. I only saw blackness, almost a solid shadow that seemed to billow out towards me. "Closer," it said again. I was in fear and I wanted to run, but it was as though I was being hypnotized, and as he said the words "closer," I took a relenting step towards it. I felt a lump in my throat that kept me from screaming. Now I could see two glowing eyes boring into me, into my soul. "Closer," it whispered again, and I took another unwanting step. From behind me, I could faintly hear the sound of footsteps coming towards me, louder the closer it came. I watched the shadow shimmer, then puff into nothing. Coming out of my trance, I now became focused on what was behind me. I jumped, startled, and turned around. I screamed and fell back, landing on my ass. John Boy stood there in front of me, the light of his flashlight under his chin, giving him an evil look. After I composed myself and explained what I thought I had seen, John Boy stood there. The fear swelled over his face and I watched him pee his pants. I don't think he ever realized what he had done. "Well, we have to check out the rooms to make sure no one but us are up here," he said. I agreed, but I wanted him to go first. I tried to guide him, but he spun around me and began to push me. "Don't push me," I said, and he let go of me, but I could feel his fingertips were still guiding me. There was only one room of the three that still had a door, and it was closed. It was the last door down the hall. I reached out to open it when we heard gunshots downstairs. Bang, bang, bang. We both jumped and held each other. "What the fuck was that?" John Boy said. "Oh shit, I gave Joe the gun," I said, grabbing John Boy's arm, pulling him along. Once we reached the first floor, Joe wasn't there. The gun lay on the floor just a few feet from the couch. "Where's Joe?" John Boy asked, his eyes aging in years before my eyes. I could only imagine my eyes looked the same. He reached out with his left hand to touch me to make sure I was still there. "Fuck if I know," I said, picking up the gun. "He shot 3 times at something." "At what?" he said. I didn't answer. I couldn't answer. "Let's look outside," I finally said. Joe was nowhere to be found outside. We saw nothing. John Boy shone his flashlight up the sides of the house and settled on a shadowed figure in the room with the closed door. "There he is," John Boy said, pointing towards the figure. "That's not Joe," I said. "Joe couldn't have gone up the stairs. We were up there. He never passed us. He couldn't have." "I can see him as clear as day," he said, and began walking towards the house. "No," I said, grabbing him. "That's not Joe." I scrambled for words and finally said with a distinct stutter of fear, "I'm sure it's a demon or something." I could see the hesitation, confusion, and fear in his eyes. Then I held up the gun. We both made the mental connection, and now holding hands, we walked back into the house. John Boy shone the light up the second floor. "You ready?" he asked. Still holding hands, we began the slow, horrifying walk upstairs, and when I looked at him, I saw my own face. When he talked, He sounded like me, yet I knew it was John Boy. "What are you doing with the gun?" he asked. "You can't shoot a demon." "No," I said. "But if that's a person up there, we can kill it." "What if it's Joe?" he whispered, then added, "Bro, you look like me, you know." "I know," I said. "And you look and sound like me, too. That's weird. How are we seeing ourselves? What if one of us wasn't really here?" "Don't talk like that," I said. "Well, what if one of us was the demon?" he said. "Stop it. What if one of us was the demon and we were leading the other back into the house?" I turned to look at John Boy, yet only seeing my face. "Please stop talking like that. Are you talking to me? Or are you talking to yourself? Or are you talking to a demon?" he said, but as he spoke the word demon, it sounded like he was a demon. "Stop it. What if..." I turned to him and held the gun to his face. "You better fucking stop it." John Boy's eyes widened, letting go of my other hand, and took a step back. I grabbed his hand and began to pull him upstairs. As we reached the top, we began to smell something like smoke, but with a slight more horrible odor, and the shadows once again danced eerily on the walls. John Boy's light shone on the closed door. We stood there looking at each other while he pointed the flashlight and I pointed the gun at the door. "Are you sure about this?" John Boy asked. I squeezed his hand and pulled him towards the door. I held out my hand and touched the knob. Our eyes, or my eyes, met mine again. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. It groaned and creaked. It was complete darkness inside. I nodded, gesturing for him to go inside. "Why me?" he whispered. "You have the light," I whispered back. He hesitated but took a step into the room. Once he was clear of the door, it slammed behind him, locking him in. He screamed, and I did too. I ran, all the while hearing him scream in torment. I stumbled and fell down the porch steps, but I was back up running before the screaming stopped. I ran into the woods, not looking back until I was out of breath, and I slid down and hid behind a tree. I was still hearing screams coming from the house. I looked at my hands, realizing I no longer had the gun. I didn't remember dropping it. I heard the footfalls of leaves rustling, coming towards me. I ran. Several hours later, I stepped into my parents' house and collapsed. It's been 2 days, and I'm being released from the hospital today. Currently, I'm not being charged with anything because they cannot find Joe or John Boy right now. Although, I have a feeling my day will come, one way or the other.